Hi, everyone. My name is Pil-Young Kim. I'm a professor of psychology at the University of Denver. I conduct research and also teach about AI and human minds. So I have a question for you. Have you ever perceived human in AI? For example, when you're chatting with ChatGPT or generative AI agents, it can be Cloud, Gemini, or something actually been around longer, like Siri and Alexa. During the conversations with those conversational chatbots, have you ever noticed that you treat them just like a human? You perceive a human mind in them. I certainly have done that. For example, when I ask ChatGPT, I say, please. Sometimes ChatGPT will tell me something that might complement my ideas. I feel supported. It feels just like chatting with another human being. So this kind of tendency that we have attributing like human mind, like feelings, thoughts, intentions, those are quite like human-like qualities, right? And we have a tendency to apply those to non-human agents. That is called anthropomorphism. And this tendency, anthropomorphism, is not limited to AI. This is actually quite common. We do this with animals a lot, in robots, electronics, in supernatural entities like sun. We think sometimes sun has certain intentions, feelings, thoughts. So this is well-known phenomena that human often uses. What we noticed recently, though, is that there's a very strong tendency of this anthropomorphism toward the AI conversational agents. So today, what I want to tell you about is our tendency of anthropomorphism and what are some psychological factors that are behind our strong tendency of doing this. So, very interestingly, as in my research, we noticed that people can perceive pain in robots. So, in one of the experiments that we conducted, we show pictures of robots that are injured and human also that were injured. And when we ask people pain level that robots were experiencing and human were experiencing, people actually rate pretty high levels of pain level for robots. And when we measure the brain activation when people were watching robots that were injured or humans were injured, we essentially saw no major differences in terms of brain responses perceiving pain in robots versus human. So let's step back a little bit. If you ask me, can robots really feel pain? I should say no, because robot doesn't have pain. It doesn't have agency that consciously realize that it can experience pain. In this experiment, I should mention that the robots we use in the images, they're quite humanoid robots, meaning that they have face, they have eyes. So this might have also increased people's tendency to anthropomorphize. If robot seems to be damaged, injured, we tend to perceive pain. We do it almost unconsciously. My colleague, we're collaborating together, Dr. Kirsten Herring, and she was talking of a very interesting scenario on the battlefield for soldiers. It will probably not very far future for us that a human soldier will have a team player that are robots, right? And if the human soldier develop very deep attachment with a robot through this anthropomorphism, when they are on the battlefield, human soldier might risk their life to save robot partner, which is not the ideal situation from the human soldier's point of view. But it is actually realistic scenario to imagine, given our very strong tendency to anthropomorphize and developing actually an emotional attachment toward non-human agents like robots. The paper that I want to discuss with you today is highly cited paper. The first author is Epley and published 2007 and discussing the three main psychological factors behind anthropomorphism. So the first one is the illicit agent knowledge. So when we're interacting with non-human agent, and if they look very similar to us, or they talk very similar, behave very similar to us, we tend to apply human knowledge, meaning that knowledge that apply to understand human to them, because knowledge about human intention, human feelings, human thoughts is something that's actually the deepest and the rich knowledge that we have. So this leads to our tendency to perceive human in them. Of course, as we get older and we have more knowledge about non-human agents, how animal mind works, how machines work, we have more decreased level of this tendency over time. Second psychological factor is what's called affectance motivation. What it means is that we have a strong motivation to control our environment and want to understand how our environment works. And that is because we have a strong tendency to protect ourselves for our safety. We like to be able to do that. So we are interacting with something that's a bit confusing. It's like non-human, but acts like human, looks like human. We would like to apply human understanding in them so that we feel like we understand how it works and we can predict its next behavior. So we have greater sense of controlling the situations and the environment. Third psychological factor is our very strong desire for social connection. Again, there is a non-human agent, acts like human, talks like human. It really activates our strong desire to make connections with it, so that we feel like we're making meaningful relationship with it. Furthermore, ideally, it can actually likes us and then supports us. So this very strong desire for social connections make us toward anthropomorphize non-human entities like robots and AI. One very interesting point that I want to mention here is while it is true that as we get older that we have a last tendency to anthropomorphize, the other way to look at it is that young children has a very strong tendency to do so. They pretty much do this unlimited way, get their pretend play. They tend to believe that pretty much there's human mind in everything. Like favorite dolls, favorite Lego figures, their imagination is just amazing. But as we get older, we have less tendency to do that. But the authors actually argues that it's not that we outgrown this anthropomorphism tendency. We still intuitively do this when we're interacting with non-human agents. But we learn to quickly get out of that thinking and apply the other existing knowledge about that non-human agents. Therefore, this tendency continues from childhood all the way to the adults. So this is related to very strong tendency that we recently find that people have toward their AI conversational agents. Let's take ChatGPT as an example. ChatGPT, in my personal opinion, has all the factors that are related to strong anthropomorphism tendency that we have. We talked about those three factors. So first, it really highly similar to us, although usually they don't have the physical properties, but not only it talks like human, its thinking pattern is very similar to us, that they help us plan and make decisions and make recommendations. Their thinking processes are so similar to us, make us to very easily believe that they're somewhat like human and then they have like human-like minds in them. Then the second is that they're just so good at naturally interacting with us. I find ChatGPT sometimes their responses are quite unpredictable in a lot of times positive way. And I feel like this activates that second factor, the affectance motivations. They're just so smart, so great at communicating with us. It's activating our effort to understanding them by thinking they're more like human. And third, their conversational style is highly supportive and socially responsive, highly activating our desire for social connection. Even if we're not consciously asking for it, it is great at giving us supportive comments and having pleasant conversation with us. So it is not surprising at all that a lot of us, without really realizing or feeling like ChatGPT has a mind that is very similar to human minds. And for us to be perceiving human mind in ChatGPT or AI is not necessarily all negative. It's just a natural way in some ways that we interacting with all non-human agents that are very similar to us in terms of their speech and behavior. However, sometimes this can be more excessive in a way that if we desire too much of social connections when AI doesn't have a genuine emotions, that can be concerning. Or children who can be very confused about how to understand AI when it's so similar to human being. There's been some research also showing that if robots are very similar to human, children's perception about that type of robot is something between human and machine, right? And I think a lot of us are perceiving generative AI in that way. We definitely know this is not human, but also, it's qualitatively different from a very passive machine that we know. So we are in this process of developing our own understanding, like how to perceive generative AI, currently somewhere between the human being and machine. Education about how AI works would be very helpful for us to have a balance in terms of how much we perceive human in AI. Thank you for your attention, and I see you next time.